Dear learners, welcome to this lecture entitled Social Capital and Cultural Capital, Some Examples. Now, in this lecture, I am going to share with you the basic concepts of social capital and cultural capital, and using some examples and some perspectives, I will make you understand the concepts more clearer. I am Dr. R. Padmaja, a senior scientist at the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics or ICRISAT based in Hyderabad, India. Now, you must have heard about social capital in another video presented by Professor Nithya Rao on the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework. Social capital is one of the livelihood assets according to the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework. Now, in this lecture, you will be able to understand why social capital and cultural capital are important, not just for individuals, but also households and even groups, and how they help in the empowerment process. Towards the end of the lecture, I will also share with you a supplementary material of a video documentary entitled Together We Sow, Together We Reap. Now, this video showcases the process of the build-up of social capital using an example of groundnut production technology and how social capital build-up helped in the empowerment process. Let us look at the Sustainable Livelihoods Framework, also commonly called as the SL framework. Most of you must have seen this in a previous lecture by Professor Nithya Rao. Now, this framework helps us to understand what are the driving factors that limit or restrict or improve household livelihood opportunities for different individuals, households and groups, and shows how they relate to one another. In this lecture, we will not go into detailed explanation of the framework, but focus on two important capital assets. Different households have access to different livelihood assets. Let us see what the different capital assets that the households may have. The livelihood or the capital assets which the poor must often make trade-offs and choices about comprise: 1. Human capital, and examples of these include health, nutrition, education, knowledge and skills, capacity to work or capacity to adopt. The second capital is natural capital. Example: land and produce, water and aquatic resources, trees, forest products, wildlife, wild foods and fibers, biodiversity, environmental services, among others. The third capital is the financial capital, and examples of this include savings, credit, debts, remittances, pensions, etc. Physical capital is the fourth asset in the livelihoods framework, and this includes infrastructure like roads, vehicles, shelter, buildings, water supply, sanitation, energy, etc. Last but the most important, equally important, is social capital, that is networks and connections, feelings of reciprocity, trust, relationships of trust and mutual understanding and support, formal and informal groups, shared values and behaviors, among others. Now, in this lecture, we will focus on social capital and the associated cultural capital. Social capital refers to the resources that are gained by being a part of a network of social relationships. Cultural capital refers to the social assets that promote social mobility beyond economic means. This is the key difference between social and cultural capital, but the social assets are the key connecting factors in both these capitals. There are a lot of sociologists, and one of them, Pierre Bourdieu, argues that a lack of economic and cultural capital creates barriers or subgroups in society to acquire and use social capital. Now, let us look at social capital first. As mentioned earlier in this lecture, we will focus more on social capital. Now, why do we need to understand social capital? Some of the reasons include: 1. It is a framework that supports learning and collective action. B. It allows people and groups to access resources in such collectives. And C. It also is a strength for an individual through the social connections an individual has. Now, horizontal paths are the ties or relationships between uniform or homogeneous groups. The vertical paths are the ties or relationships or linkages that are between different types. Example, these relations could be by caste, by religion, class or other socio-economic variables. Social capital has many definitions. Let's see some of the most common and widely accepted definitions of social capital. The most common thinkers who coined the word social capital and defined it include Portes, Coleman, Putnam and Bourdieu. All of them have one thing in common when they define social capital, that is, they all talk about social structure. So, we will discuss social structure in the next slide. Now, I would like to introduce you to the main theoretical frameworks on social capital. They are the theory of Putnam, who defined social capital as norms, relationships and trust. Bourdieu, who sees social capital and who uses social networks as a key element of social capital and explains social capital at the individual level. Coleman, who looks at social capital in the family and group settings. Now, in the previous slide, we saw that there are many definitions of social capital and all of them have a common element, that is social structure. Now, what is social structure? Social structure is a formation of social relations and positions. It is a multidimensional space of the differentiated social positions of the people in a society or any other group or collectives. For example, there are many people living in a village. They are identified and differentiated on the basis of either their caste or social grouping, their education, their position in the village, etc. So, we often hear people referring to one person as a sarpanch of the village or a self-help group leader or a cobbler, etc. So, the village therefore is one form of social structure and different people have different positions in this social structure. So, let us go a little more in depth on social capital and learn something more about social capital. I would like to talk about the three main theoretical frameworks of social capital as mentioned earlier. The first framework, as I have said, is by Putnam, who talks about trust, norms and networks that facilitate cooperation and mutual benefits. Bourdieu talks about economic, cultural and social capital, and he speaks more about it at the individual level. Coleman, on the other hand, again looks at social structure and he says it is at the family and community level. So, let us look at Putnam's definition of social capital. Now, there are three components of Putnam's definition. One is on norms and obligations, second is trust, and third is social networks, especially voluntary associations. From Putnam's perspective, social capital enhances the benefit of investment in physical and human capital. Social networks are one set of horizontal associations between different people according to Putnam. Example, a neighbor taking care of others' children in sudden needs. When you have some emergency and you can leave your child with your neighbor, and later when the neighbor has some work or emergency situation, you offer to help that neighbor. So, this is social capital according to Putnam. Now, let us go to Bourdieu's definition. According to Bourdieu, most social capital is a resource used by people to support their strategies for maintaining and changing their positions within hierarchical social structures. As well as using the idea of social capital, Bourdieu is also credited with originating the concept of cultural capital, which is widely used in educational theory. Now, Bourdieu distinguishes linkages between three forms of capital: economic capital, cultural capital, and he including the symbolic capital that he mentions here, and social capital. Coleman's concept of social capital is defined by its function. It is not a single entity, but a variety of different entities having two characteristics in common. They all consist of some aspect of social structure. The people or actors can use them as resources to achieve their interests. So, according to Coleman, social capital is anything that facilitates individual or collective or group action. Now, Putnam also refers to bridging and bonding social capital. The difference between bonding and bridging social capital relates to the nature of the relationships or associations in the social group or community. Bonding social capital is within a group or community, whereas bridging social capital is between social groups, social class, race, religion or other important socio-demographic or socio-economic characteristics. The bonding or the bridging distinction can be made in relation to a range of relations and network characteristics. So, the table presented summarizes the main features of each of these two aspects. Now, in the above definitions by Bourdieu, one more point was common. Can you remember that word? It's social networks. Appealing to the concept of social capital as networks and relationships, this diagram presents what social networks constitute. As you can see, social networks is the structural aspect and it provides access to the embedded resources that are available in the networks. Networks are formed of people called as actors in this case, and these actors, through the networks to which they belong, facilitate group action, exchange of resources, sharing of resources and opportunities for development. Alongside this, networks also provide a structure to the actors which becomes a platform and gives them an identity also. A good example of this is the women's self-help group. All of you know what a women's self-help group is. Now, women who are members of a self-help group have a specific identity. Now, their members can get information from other members. There is a credit or a loan facility that is available to them, and as a group, each individual can access the opportunities that the group provides them for their own development. So, you will see this clearly in the video documentary that I mentioned, Together We Sow, Together We Reap. Learners, as we have seen in the previous slides, social capital therefore has two perspectives, individual perspective and a group perspective. So, let us see what these two perspectives are. The individual perspective is how individuals access and use resources that are embedded in the social networks to gain resources. Group perspective is how certain groups develop and maintain social capital, collective assets, enhances the members' choices. So, let us see this through an illustration. Now, in this picture, there are men, women, young boys and girls in a village. Now, these people, individuals, are connected to one another and share information, other resources, trust. They also share some village norms. Now, these people may also have links with the money lender in the village, a political leader or an SHG leader or an SHG member. They use these connections for their individual benefit. This is the individual perspective. Now, these people also belong to different groups or organizations or networks. As a group or as an individual, they also have connections with other groups. For example, in this case, it can be a youth group or it can be a women's self-help group or the Gram Panchayat. Either as individuals in the group or either as a group, they use the resources that are available from these networks for the benefit of themselves or the community or the village. This is the group perspective. So, let me summarize what we have learned so far. We learned about social structure, social networks and social capital. In addition to this, we also learned that social capital is based on relationships. These relationships can be based on a personal basis, their quality, that is the strength of the relationship, or a weak relationship, or relationship for a specific purpose. Example, you join an SHG to get a loan or a credit facility. Now, for example, when we join a workers group in our locality, we tend to maintain the group relationship and ensure that we do not miss the group relationship and we do not miss the activity of the group. In this case, it is the morning walk, because we all want to keep track of our height, weight and health. So, this is how relationships affect outcomes. Hence, social capital can also affect the outcomes. All these determine an individual's position in the network. They allow the individual to be aware of the resources that are available in the network. So, I hope learners, you have some clarity about what social capital is all about, what are the different definitions and meanings of social capital and why it is important in our everyday lives. Now, let us also learn a little more about cultural capital. Now, before we actually start talking about cultural capital, we should also first try to understand what is meant by culture. So, let us start learning about social capital through an understanding of culture. When we were understanding Bourdieu's definition of social capital, I mentioned about cultural capital. So, let us first learn what we mean by culture. Now, culture is a set of attitudes, practices and beliefs that are fundamental to the functioning of different societies. For example, when we talk of culture, we say that in our culture, especially in the Indian culture, wearing a saree is an aspect of culture. That is how women should be dressed. So, that is one part of culture. Or when we see somebody or when we meet other people, we greet them saying namaste. So, that is culture of our society. It is expressed as in a particular society's values and customs. So, the examples that I gave before actually tell you what culture is and how it is expressed in a particular society's values and customs, which evolve over time as they are transmitted from one generation to another. So, culture keeps changing, it keeps evolving, it can be enhanced also. Now, with this understanding of culture, let us try to talk about cultural capital. Cultural capital is the social assets of a person. Now, what do we mean by social assets of a person in this case? It can be education, it can be his intellect, it can be his style of his or her style of speech, the style of dress of a person, etc. And these assets promote social mobility in a stratified society. Cultural capital functions as a social relation within an economy of practices, that is systems of exchange, and includes the accumulated cultural knowledge that confers social status and power. There are three forms or types of cultural capital that have been theorized by Bourdieu. These are embodied capital, objectified state of cultural capital and institutionalized state of cultural capital. The objectified state of cultural capital is multiple objects we use to indicate our social status and class. Institutionalized state of cultural capital is the way society measures our social capital. Now, let us understand these three types of cultural capital a little more and much better. Now, the embodied cultural capital includes what we personify as the individual, our skills and understanding, our accents, mannerisms, even and importantly our taste in all manner of things, from music to clothes to food or to watching TV programs. The second form of cultural capital is the objectified state of cultural capital. Now, objectified cultural capital refers to tangible belongings such as a car or a house, and even between a car you may have different brands of car, you may have a big house, a bungalow, etc. It also refers to other material goods like shoes, clothes, etc. So, all these are the objectified state of cultural capital. And the last form of cultural capital is the institutionalized state of cultural capital. The institutionalized state of cultural capital refers to credentials given through institutions of authority such as schools, universities and other official bodies. So, this includes qualifications, degrees, diplomas, awards, medals, etc. that an individual has. This type of capital allows us to gain access to more powerful positions. For example, a degree from an IIT will help an individual fetch a better job with a higher salary. So, this is the institutionalized state of cultural capital. So, in this lecture we have learnt many concepts. Now, let me try to summarize using an example of education, and let me try to explain to you how these are interlinked. What is interlinked? Social capital, cultural capital, and we are taking an example of education, which is the human capital. Now, by human capital we mean investing in education like attending schools, colleges, training programs, etc. This will either give us a degree or a diploma or an award or a certificate. Now, this certificate or degree will give us better job or employment prospects. So, the position will also give us respect, it will give us prestige, recognition, self-esteem, etc. So, this is what we call as cultural capital. Now, the education or the degree will also lead us to joining or becoming members of many networks. So, also your position in a job or an organization will entitle you to become members of different groups. So, this membership and access to different networks is social capital. So, all these are interrelated. What you know, how you know and who you know, and these three facilitate greater interaction leading to better outcomes. We can also see these kinds of linkages with other livelihood capital assets. Let us conclude what we have learnt in this lecture so far. We have learnt about social and cultural capital and its linkages to the sustainable livelihoods framework. Now, social and cultural capital are two important livelihood assets, and they combine with other assets in a multitude of different ways leading to generating positive livelihood outcomes. Social and cultural capital can both be created or they can also sometimes be destroyed as a result of the trends, shocks and seasonality of the vulnerability context. Individuals and groups themselves influence transforming structures and processes. Generally speaking, the greater the people's asset endowment, the more influence they can exert. Hence, one way to achieve empowerment may be to support people to build up their assets. Those with more assets tend to have a greater range of options and an ability to switch between multiple livelihood strategies to secure their livelihoods. And lastly, people's ability to escape from poverty is dependent upon their access to assets. Different assets are required to achieve different livelihood outcomes. Dear learners, there are a list of references that are also available in the chapter that is provided in the course. Please refer to those references to learn more about social capital and cultural capital. Hope you have enjoyed this lecture on social capital and cultural capital, and it must have been a great learning experience for you. Along with many partners and ICRISAT, we would like to enhance your understanding about social and cultural capital and how these examples that I have provided will help you in your everyday practices as well, and also help you in the development process understanding. Thank you, learners.